What's up, people? I'm Tangy Nacho, and welcome to the recap for Overwatch League Season 2, Stage 2, Week 1. This week we finally got to see the pros take on the new patch, and it has just been a treat so far. Of course, a lot of teams are still falling back to that 3-3 they've been playing all season so far, but you can't really blame them. It hasn't been that long and they have to adjust to the new meta. That being said, a lot of teams are finding success with bunker comps using Orisa and Bastion with the new Baptiste hero, so that's been really cool to see. And of course, it's amazing to finally get to see the DPS players on the role they belong on rather than playing Brigitte or Zarya. Anyway, we've got 16 games to get through, so without further ado, let's jump right into the matches. The stage started off with the Philadelphia Fusion versus the New York Excelsior. I thought this match would be pretty close, but it turns out New York Excelsior is just too dominant to handle. Not to mention, Philadelphia is really inconsistent, as I've mentioned before, and they definitely did not look good in their match against New York on Thursday. I've said before that I think Carpe and EQO could be the best DPS duo in the business, and I still think that, but it seems like Philadelphia as a whole just needs a little more time to adjust to the new meta. Plus, coming out against a team like New York doesn't help things at all. At the end of the match, it was New York Excelsior winning 4-0. Next up was the Boston Uprising versus the Atlanta Reign. I'm actually really hyped on Atlanta right now with the addition of Baby Bay. It's sad to see DeFran go, but they do look like they have a solid roster. I'm just not exactly sure what they're doing not playing Dako. Not that FRD is a bad player, but Dako and Pokpo just have so much synergy and history together, it doesn't really make sense why they're not playing Dako. Regardless though, they came out really strong with 2 map wins and they looked like they were going to take it against Boston really easily. But as is quickly becoming the norm, after halftime Boston was able to turn it around and reverse sweep to get the 3-2 victory. Color Hex and Aim God look like absolute monsters, and I'm really glad that they're finally kind of hitting their stride. What concerns me is that they wait till the second half of the match to show up. I guess Boston just doesn't know anything other than being the underdog. But either way, they won it 3-2. Then up next we had the Shanghai Dragons versus the LA Gladiators. As a DPS focused team, I was expecting Shanghai to be pretty decent in this meta. But unfortunately for them, they went against 2 really solid rosters this week. DM was getting the better of Surefour in a lot of cases, but what matters is how the team does as a whole. LA just seemed like the more cohesive and more flexible group, and that's why they were able to take the win 3-1. Next up was the Guangzhou Charge versus the Paris Eternal. And my god, I don't know what happened to Guangzhou, but something is wrong with that roster and they need to get it fixed quickly. Not to take anything away from Paris, it's amazing to finally get to see Shadowburn on Pharah. He absolutely popped off. But the Charge are just crumbling. I mean, they've never been the most consistent team, but they'd usually be able to hold their own against a team like Paris. I mean, it wasn't all bad. In the second half of the game, really, they started to show some signs of life, but I'm finding it really hard to place exactly how good they are. By the end of the match, it was 4-0 for Paris Eternal. Moving on to Friday, we had the London Spitfire versus the Florida Mayhem. And this is the first time we got to see Florida with their all-Korean roster that they're going for now. I wasn't expecting this to be close at all, but I was wrong, and I think there were 2 main reasons for it. First is that now with everyone on Florida being Korean, the comms are probably much better, more cohesive, and they're able to get more plays done. I don't think their roster is perfect by any means, but it's definitely looking better than it was before. And the second reason is that London seemed a little reluctant to try new compositions. Despite the fact that the Ghost meta is not their meta at all, they still kept going back to 3-3. We all know Gesture has an awesome Orisa, so now that it's kinda meta, why not get that going? Maybe they thought they didn't need to against Florida, and I guess they didn't have to because they ended up winning 2-1 anyway. Then we had the Washington Justice versus the Toronto Defiant. And while Washington is looking a little bit better with the addition of the main support player Arc from New York, it looks like they need a little bit longer to get used to playing with him still. But Toronto had a huge pickup in I'm37. If you don't know, this is a guy that went from Open Division to the Overwatch League in less than a month, I think, and he is actually popping off on HitScan. It's crazy. Never seen anything like it, but glad to see him in the league, and I hope he stays for a long time. It was also great to see other Toronto players like Ivy finally playing DPS like they should be. And to no surprise to anyone, Toronto Defiant defeated Washington 3-1. Next was the Los Angeles Valiant versus the San Francisco Shock. This is a matchup of arguably the best team in the league versus the record-wise worst team in the league. It's so crazy because last season the Valiant would have been the clear favorite in this matchup, but it's not the case this time. San Francisco pretty much rolled over Valiant with no problem at all. I honestly can't even remember any highlight plays from the Valiant. It was just all San Francisco all the time, and they won 4-0. Then to close out the day was a match that I knew was going to be hype. It was the LA Gladiators versus the Seoul Dynasty. This was a hype match because not only are these teams really evenly matched, but Seoul's main tank Fisher was just traded over from the LA Gladiators pretty recently. And up to this point, whenever Fisher came up against his past team, he was able to win. But this time the Gladiators finally turned it around. The Dynasty won the first map, and then LA won the next two. Seoul barely squeaked it out on Watchpoint Gibraltar to force a map 5, and unfortunately for them, they weren't able to finish off the comeback, and the LA Gladiators won 3-2. Regardless of the outcome, both teams played really well in my opinion, and it was a really awesome match to watch. Moving on to Saturday, we had the Florida Mayhem versus the Philadelphia Fusion. Luckily for Philly, they had an easier matchup this time, and they were able to get the victory. Florida just doesn't have any star potential, anybody to carry the team, so it's really hard for them to get any wins. If Philly can get their act together and be more consistent, they'll definitely be a playoff team. This match ended 3-1 in favor of Philadelphia. Next up was Toronto Defiant versus Boston Uprising, and once again we had a reverse sweep from Boston. I don't know how they do it or why they're not able to perform in the first half of the matches, but this makes 3 in a row. And against a team like Toronto Defiant no less. And it's not even like you can say Boston is just good on control because map 1 is control and they always lose it. I don't know, none of the maps were that close except for Oasis, which was map 5, it went 2-1 for Boston, so the series was 3-2. Then we had the New York Excelsior versus the Shanghai Dragons, and this was actually closer than you might think. Shanghai almost won it on Oasis, should have won it on Hanamura, could have won it on Eichenwald, and then by the time they got to Watchpoint Gibraltar it was over. But this could have been a completely different story if they had won Hanamura and gone into the half 1-1. Instead, it was a draw, and that set New York up for a 3-0 victory. Ending off the day was the Chengdu Hunters versus Paris Eternal. It's kind of crazy how Paris can go from 4-0ing a team to getting 4-0'd themselves. Chengdu is definitely one of the happiest teams in this new meta because you know they love playing crazy comps, and this is a crazy meta. Nobody really knows what's going on, so Chengdu can take advantage of it really well. This is one of the teams that surprised me the most in the Overwatch League. I didn't think they would be great at all, but they're looking pretty solid. Granted, it was against Paris, which isn't the best team, but still. Winning 4-0 is nothing to scoff at. Starting off Sunday, we had the San Francisco Shock versus the Guangzhou Charge. And like I said before, Guangzhou Charge kind of crumbled this week. I'm not sure if they're taking a little bit of extra time to adjust to the meta or whatever, but they need to step their game up next week. They went 0-8 on maps this week, losing to San Francisco Shock 4-0. Then we had the Atlanta Reign versus the London Spitfire. And finally we're seeing the London Spitfire from last year. They decided not to play GOATs constantly, and it worked for them extremely well. The reverse sweep from Boston may have gotten to Atlanta's head, and it's unfortunate because they are a really solid team, but they ended up losing 4-0 to London. Next was the Vancouver Titans versus the Hangzhou Spark, and I thought this one would be at least decently competitive if they played Gushui more, and they did, but Vancouver is just insane. They finally had Haxall back on Genji sometimes, Stitch was in the fray, they can't be beaten. I don't understand how they're so good, they just are. I know all I do is fanboy over Vancouver, but how can you not? They're just insane. Hangzhou fell completely at their mercy and Vancouver took the win 4-0. If you've been keeping track, that's 5 shutouts in a row and we have one more match. The Washington Justice versus the Chengdu Hunters, which does have the possibility of being a 4-0 considering Chengdu 4-0'd Paris earlier. But fortunately for Washington, some of their players are finally stepping up, specifically Corey, who's looking great on DPS. They went into the half 1-1, but then they kinda got handled on King's Row and lost Watchpoint for a 3-1 victory to Chengdu. The standout player this week was probably Fury from the London Spitfire. He ate so many grabs that Babybay tried to throw out in the game against Atlanta, it was just ridiculous, like Babybay was laughing about it by the end of the game. Such an incredible diva player, I just love watching him play. Anyway, the video is getting pretty long, so I want to get my predictions done real quick before I close it out. Normally I talk a bit about each one and why I'm predicting it, but I'm just going to tell you guys the scores and we can discuss more in the comments. So here we go. Paris Eternal versus Florida Mayhem, 2-1 Paris. NYXL versus Washington Justice, 4-0 New York. Vancouver Titans versus Seoul Dynasty, 3-1 Vancouver. Toronto Defiant versus Philadelphia Fusion, 3-2 Defiant. LA Valiant versus Atlanta Reign, 3-1 Reign. Boston Uprising versus Hangzhou Spark, 3-2 Boston. You gotta vote for the reverse sweep. Guangzhou Charge versus San Francisco Shock, 4-0 Shock. Chengdu Hunters versus Shanghai Dragons, 3-2 Chengdu. London Spitfire versus Philadelphia Fusion, 3-2 London. Vancouver Titans versus Houston Outlaws, 3-1 Titans. Dallas Fuel versus Toronto Defiant, 3-2 Toronto. LA Gladiators versus Guangzhou Charge, 3-1 Gladiators. Dallas Fuel versus Paris Eternal, 3-2 Dallas. Atlanta Reign vs Washington Justice, 3-1 Atlanta. NYXL vs Florida Mayhem, 4-0 New York. And lastly, LA Valiant vs LA Gladiators, 3-2 Valiant. And that's all I got. Like the video if you enjoyed the recaps, and be sure to subscribe to join the Tang Gang. Comment below with who you think has the best Baptiste in the league. I'll be back next week with another recap, so until we meet again, later people!